Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is one of India's leading conservationists. He's a convener for INTACH and has been involved with numerous projects and initiatives around the country, but more particularly and specifically in the capital city of Delhi, to help restore its heritage and reaffirm its culture. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. O.P. Jain.
Thank you.
Mr. Jain, you've been, you set up more than 25 years ago an organization, Sanskriti Pratishthan, and you have been so closely involved with issues of conservation. And there is this wonderful, quotation that you have given from the great writer Mulkraj Anand, who had said that, O.P., if you don't do something, you'll just end up being a shopkeeper. And I think that, he was just referring to the fact that you were really a business person in dealing with paper. And then this sort of universe opened up for you, and a natural proclivity and interest in culture began to manifest itself concretely. What is the value of conservation? Beyond the romantic, it's nice to have buildings restored. It's nice to have aspects of our cultural heritage sustained. But in a very utilitarian world where we're always looking at cost benefit, why should we spend money on this? Why should we spend money on that? What is the value of conservation?
Well, I think conservation, if you look at it as something of the past, then it's different. But I personally feel that conservation is also tomorrow. And in fact, and this is what that realization we never had, because conservation was never an issue with us. Because in our country, the entire philosophy of conservation, museums, and preserving things was not really, it never existed, because we could create new ones. It was always that, okay, it is old, let's make a new one, and a better one. So with a base of 40 million craftspeople, artisans and all that, our whole thinking was different. But now I think it has become very relevant, because it's impossible to make and create those things which we in the yesterdays, our forefathers and we could do it 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. To some extent we can. In fact, I personally feel that we are a lucky country in many ways, because out of all the 5 civilizations, if you look at it around the world, we are perhaps in sense of conservation and sense of our craft base and sense of our is still existing. It is not gone totally, in spite of British colonial rules and even otherwise. So
that the Sanskriti.
So Sanskriti, basically, idea is this, that how do we make it this idea of conservation goes deeper into our systems. That is, but I think I personally feel that even if you say the economic aspect of it, so imagine now, how much it will cost to make another Taj Mahal. The millions and billions and trillions of dollars or rupees or whatever you call it has been spent in that. And it's a shame that if you can't conserve it, if you can't even retain them, and use it for tomorrow. Because that's our future.
When you say use it for tomorrow, is that just a sort of a utilitarian argument or a utilitarian logic that, one would argue that, what is the use, of Taj Mahal? It's wonderful, this great, object of beauty, and it gives us, sensory pleasure, and in some ways, in a diminishing kind of way for most people. I think they're now deriving their pleasure not from the romance of the Taj in moonlight, but inside a movie theater, or watching a DVD or something else. The sensibilities have changed. The sensibility that nurtured the Taj Mahal as this great sort of offering to love has changed. Notions of love have changed.
Well, I think there can be 2 aspects of it. Even earlier, as you will remember, I recall that Sahir wrote something against Taj Mahal, that it is like a joke on a love, which poor man can't afford. It's the only way. There are 2 ways always. And in India, it's not difficult to have two views on anything. It's something which is accepted fact in this country, that we can always look at it differently. But I personally feel that you see that I mean, even if we say I mean our self-confidence, our what I should say, to me, our heritage is an anchor of this country. And we are lucky that we have got a lot is lost, but a lot stays still. I mean, I'm basically hands-on man, so I can't you know talk about the academics of it and the intellectual aspect of it. But as a sort of hands-on person being involved in the conservation at the ground level, I feel. I mean, when I see something being recreated, or something which was created thousands of years before, I mean, I imagine the people, those who have had such sensitivity. Now, and the people, and the craftspeople, those who made all those kind of things, and fortunately, as I said, a lot of it still exists. So, what I feel is this, that I mean, that cynical view about, say, for example. Sometimes even say like tourism, for example, and if you put tourism and heritage together, now it is a double-edged sword. It is good for the country in terms of revenues, in terms of presence of the country in the world, all the world scenario, but at the same time it can create a lot of problems at the social levels. That's happening in many countries. Those who are totally gone into become touristic countries. But at the same time, I think perhaps we have a good chance, and I personally feel that we can retain both. I mean, in fact, for example, you see, there's the revival. I mean, same thing can be said about our alternate medicines. Why have so much of this thing too much? Why don't you have a pill at the end of it? But now people realize, no, it's not that the answer. Same thing is happening about our yoga, Same thing is happening about, say, architecture, for example. I mean, say in Delhi, if you see that, I mean, I'm surprised sometimes that when I raised this question in a meeting of some architects, very well-known architects, I was hooted down. Because I said, as an ordinary man, I want to understand after independence, have we made any beautiful building in the city which can be proud of? It's of an international standard, or not international, but even the standard that it matches something like a Mayan's tomb, it matches something like that even British period on monuments.
You were just talking about has recent architecture produced any elegant building, enduring building like like the Humayun's tomb is something that you mentioned. You also said that you were a hands-on person.
Yeah.
What is the role of a common average citizen in this sort of hands-on approach to conservation?
Well, I think hands-on approach, when I said, was that somebody has to do it, because unfortunately a situation we have reached a situation where most of our tangible heritage, I should say, is in the hands of the government systems. All our museums, all our monuments, and all these kind of things. But the apparatus and the kind of systems which the government has got is a little bit of a problem, in the sense that they find it, first of all, we don't have any budget. Heritage doesn't generate any revenues, which is a very sad thing, and in fact we never thought of it earlier. Now we are thinking about it, and there's a discussion at least about it. But the point is that somebody has to do it, and that is why perhaps. But one thing which is very crucial and which is very amazing about this country is that if you my experience as one of the founder partners of Nimrana, for example, when we did Nimrana, we bought this place as a total ruin.
Which is explained that Nimrana was one of the very early initiatives, which took an old, disused fort, restored it, and has made it, in a sense, a living monument that is being used, and people participate.
That's what I say when I say,
and experience, in a sense, what it must have been like to use that space centuries ago.
That's right.
So you were telling us about
You see,
the Nimra.
what I meant was that when hands-on work means that we did that. And after that, thousands Nimra have been created. That's what I'm trying to say. When I say hands-on work, if some people take it, you know, I mean, because ultimately heritage and all these kind of, you know, tangible or intangible belongs to people. We are only trustees and managers of that.
So in what ways is sort of, you know, the new climate of, you know, privatization of the private sector, you know, taking the lead in so many spheres of life, you know, things that we have taken for granted, water supply, electricity, education, things that have been the preserve of the state are now really a part of private enterprise. So why not conservation as a part of private enterprise? But aren't there inherent risks in that, you know, the motive is commercial,
yes,
we're going to convert everything into a commercial property, a commercial proposition, and the sacred sanctity of conservation will be lost.
You see, I mean, it's a very interesting thing because, see, this is exactly what is being debated these days in the country. How much and to what extent? And even question is raised why. Point is that I'm not saying commercialization. I'm saying a public and private partnership. I'm saying that, as I said, ultimately the heritage belongs to people. In our country, while there are 3,500 or 4,000 ASI protected monuments, there are about, in my opinion, 400,000 unprotected monuments which are scattered all over the country like plants. You know, I'm talking of monuments right now. Same thing applies to all other intangible heritages and other natural and resources and all that. But the point is that we can do the experiments with them first to begin with. It's not necessary that you hand over Taj Mahal to somebody.
But what is the solution? You have these unprotected monuments. Do we just protect them and expand the domain of, you know, protection and control? Or is the solution, as happens in sort of in many European countries, for example, where you try and make them living monuments? You know, you have government offices, as we do in Delhi, and you actually use them and you make them a part of everyday life.
I tell you, because see, this is exactly how the monuments can be saved, because they have to be reused. We are not trying to transfer the ownership rights. We are only talking about the management of it. We are only talking about the restoration or conservation of it. We are only talking about value addition to it, which can come from the private sector.
You know, when you're looking at conservation, it calls for many very specific skills, and several of these are open to, you know, discussion, debate, and controversy. And I remember that I had to travel to Angkor Wat, where the Archaeological Survey was engaged in a major renovation initiative there. And there was great controversy because there was one section of international opinion which felt that you know, conservation really meant just preserving the monument in its present state of decay, so that there was no further decay, and using devices and techniques that would enable it to sustain its present state of ruin, in a sense. And that was the Archaeological Survey's opinion or approach, which was, well, let's try and restore it to a substantial degree. And a great deal of controversy as to, you know, whether you could see the difference between elements that had been restored, or, you know, should the restoration be done in a manner that it was disguised. So there are many points of view and approaches to this. What is yours?
Well, I mean, I personally feel that the universal rule and the rule of the game is minimal intervention. If I think in any conservation effort, overdone, if it is overdone, I mean, it will always be people will criticize it. Even in Rome, there are lots of monuments which have been. Now they keep doing, they keep doing gold work on that, and there has been criticism on that. Minimal intervention is really is the essence of the whole thing. If we, as you rightly mentioned, conservation so that they don't fall apart. I mean, there's no further decay. That is exactly what we mean. An Indian context, which is very crucial. But at the same time, there are few monuments, like for example, if something breaks or a minar, a portion of a minar breaks at Taj Mahal. And we are very lucky, Rachi, that we have craft people, those who can create another Taj Mahal if we want. So if we have got that kind of a skill available at a reasonable price, then why not use that? But the point is that everything, to restore everything is a silly idea in my opinion. I mean, only few, I mean, that is why we insist on grading. You have to have, say for example, first of all, a monument, why it is important, historically important, archaeologically important, or architecturally important. And then again we grade it, A, B, C, D. And each grade and each kind of situation demands a different kind of intervention. That is when I said expert advice or sensitivity, I meant that. And that is very crucial for any kind of a conservation effort. And even, you see, now these days we are debating about the city, for example, as a whole, Delhi as a whole. I mean, we have given an idea or a thought to the government of Delhi that in the Commonwealth Games, you know, I mean, why don't you say your USP could be that you are coming to a heritage city. I mean, the idea has been appreciated. Hopefully it happens.
So what do you mean by a heritage city?
Heritage city in the sense that, you know, a city which has is one of the oldest cities of the country and maybe of the world. I mean, which has been habited almost off and on and invaded, demolished, gone, shifted, again came back, almost like 5,000 years or 4,000 years. So therefore, it's a heritage city in any case. But the point is that there are 1,200 monuments which were documented. There may be many more, but the point is there are areas which can be heritage areas, and it is not difficult to in 4 years time till that that games come. I mean, in fact, an effort has already started. We have done the St. James, restored St. James Church in Kashmiri Gate. We have restored 50 monuments in Jamali Kamali area. We have restored many buildings in Chandni Chowk now.
So when you say we, this is in
INTACH.
In your role as a convener.
My role as a convener of INTACH Delhi chapter, because we are basically working as a catalyst, you know, to ensure, because you see what happens that lots of things don't happen in the country, primarily because there are so many agencies involved in everything. We play the catalytic role so that we can bring DDA and MCD and the central government, the Department of Archaeology and the ASI and the Forest Department together, because otherwise and that is what we are doing, and it has been successful. So when I meant private and public partnership, I meant that our intervention, supplying the experts, supplying the technical know-how, make a nice proposal, even if necessary, get funding, and then the government supports us. I mean, if we do that, we have made it. And this is what has happened in the countries where, I mean, after all, Europe has seen 2 world wars. You can imagine how much was demolished, and you can see that things have been brought back. Even in London, in Berlin, in many other cities, if you go, you can see that those buildings were totally demolished. I saw an opera house in Munich, you know. It has been restored to its own glory, totally devastated, but they had the record, they had the documentation. I mean, we are mostly talking about the tangible heritage, but then the same thing applies to the intangible heritage.
Intangible heritage, which means not just the heritage that is you know, brick, mortar, concrete, and maybe in more recent history, steel, but the other aspects of heritage that make a city a living city. I think that you were using the European example, and what's perhaps happened in many European contexts is that it really is the tangible heritage that has been preserved. And so you have the buildings, but you go inside the buildings and there's modern technology, and there's heating and ventilation and air conditioning and all the most contemporary recent technological interventions to make life livable and habitable. But from the exterior there is this facade of heritage. So in that sense they're living in the present in a shell that is history. I think that what you're talking about and have been working for through INTACH and your own initiatives with your own foundation is to look at the aspects of the living culture, which means the arts, the cuisine, the sounds and the tastes and the flavors and the smells of history that you would associate with those monuments. How difficult is that? Because in some senses that is antithetical, to development, to the modern processes. We're willing to accept these old buildings because they might be, beautiful. It sort of looks, fashionable to be cultured and traditional, but it's not utilitarian. So how do you reconcile this living culture and preserving that?
You see, culture to me is a living thing, and a continuity. It is not that you can define culture. Culture defines us. I mean, that is the whole concept of culture, is not that it begins somewhere, ends somewhere. There is a constant continuity of culture. So therefore, influences which perhaps used to take 100 years or 1,000 years to happen in a society are happening every second year or third year now. The speed has become faster. Therefore, it's impossible to escape I won't say onslaught, but escape the existence of those changes. And I think it is the resilience of the culture, in my opinion, and to me, the resilient culture is the real culture. It's resilience to absorb and to assimilate, and to then still keep its sensitivity, still keep its, that essence of it, is the crucial part. And perhaps that is what I say in India when we talk about intangible culture. I mean, in my opinion, this is the strength of our culture, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm not parochial about it, that we have a capacity to assimilate, we have a capacity to absorb, we have a capacity to, evolve. Or it may be sometimes, the only danger sometimes that if it is organic, it happens in any case. But if it is thrusted sometimes, it creates some problem. And then secondly, I always compare culture with the river, If you see the flow of the river, how it starts, how it goes into the sea, again comes back, and then how it finds its way, negotiates, and expands, squeezes. The culture is like that.
You have mentioned people at the helm several times in governments, and whether it's controlling the archaeological survey or bureaucracies and what have you. To what degree has your work been aided or hampered, in a sense, by the culture of people in government?
It's a very interesting point, actually, and I find it difficult sometimes. You'll be surprised to know that I'm working mostly with the government, with their support, with their some money many times. But I have also filed 12 PILs in my lifetime against the government. And you'll be surprised that most of the PILs, not with the written consent, but most of them have been filed with the consent of the government systems.
When you say government, you mean the political leadership or the bureaucracy?
Both. I mean, when they throw their hands, because they are also caught into their own system, and they become slaves of their own system. And sometimes they find that systems won't work because
so give us an example where the bureaucracy and the government are frustrated, and in a sense what they're looking for is the sanction or the endorsement or the support of the judiciary, something which in the public domain at least they're very, very wary of acknowledging that, we don't need the judiciary to intervene to get things done. But from what you're saying is that, this is something that is almost implicitly sought. So give us an example where this is
I'll give you many examples. Like, when we intervene to save the canopy, I mean, there are people, those who are after it, that it should go.
This is the canopy in
India Gate.
Right.
We thought it's a tribute to an architect, and it's an architectural feature, and not, because the statue was already removed. But why should it go? I mean, and therefore there were people, those who were after that it should go.
So I should just pause to explain that this was a canopy and in the India Gate complex at one end of Rajpath, which was sort of a spillover in a sense from Luton's Delhi, and there was a great deal of resistance. And then 2 points of view, whether it should go or whether it should stay, and whether it should make room for a for statue of a national Indian leader, or whether it should stay as a relic of the Raj. I think that was the kind of debate and confusion that there was. And then you filed
I found that I got I mean, most of the people at that point of time in the government systems, they say there's so much of pressure from few people or from some group of people that it's impossible for us to say don't do it. So why don't you go? We said, can I go to the court? They say yes. Like this recently, the recent example is the police memorial at Chanakyapuri. Horrendous, structure they have started. They put up.
This was again a memorial that the police department had wished to build to honor its heroes, and there was a great deal of controversy on whether it should be appropriate or not. So what you're really saying is that in situations such as this, where the government or the establishment feels unable to resist pockets of opinion, they say, well, maybe if the judiciary intervenes and just makes this illegal, then this will help us deal with the situation.
That's right.
Not a very sort of, how do I put it, a democratic way of dealing with, in a sense that, your work with INTACH is really seeking to involve the people. And yet, the same strategy that says, well, there's one way, we'll just fix the system.
Well, I don't know, but you can also call it as a stick and carrot, I mean, with both, because if you are working and if you want to do things, if you want things to happen in the country, you have to negotiate constantly and also confront constantly.
So for you, O.P. Jain, conservationist, is that how you'd be happiest being described professionally?
Well, not really. But I would rather say I'm a entrepreneur, in the field of culture.
Entrepreneurship usually is associated, well, I'm an entrepreneur with business, with making money and what have you. So my question really was that, what is it that, drives you, excites you, motivates you to be this cultural entrepreneur? You're obviously not just doing it for money because, you're running lots of not-for-profits, you're involved with organizations and institutions where you seem to be giving more of yourself than you could conceivably be receiving. So what is this?
My background as a business person, and not being a professional in any aspect of culture that way, that I'm not in the academics, I'm not a conservationist myself or a trained person. Everything has come to me as a hands-on experience and my sensitivity towards the whole issue. Point is that when I say entrepreneurship, what I mean is that, for example, in the development sector, there are lots of entrepreneurs now.
So what you mean is that the skills of entrepreneurship...
entrepreneurship is to get the whole thing done, to ensure that things move.
But what gratification do you get out of it? What joy do you get out of this sort of, terribly busy day of, coping with the bureaucracy, going out to difficult, dusty locations and spaces and fighting and struggling? At the end of the day, when you sit back and what gives you joy and what gives you happiness?
Well, I think the very fact that at the age of 77, I'm doing well, and I enjoy it because otherwise, and point is that when I see something being created, it gives me joy. It gives me happiness, because there's a whole attitude of taking the brick away or putting it back. What I'm trying to do is to put the brick back and not take it away.
Mr. O.P. Jain, thank you very much. This has been a great honor and a great privilege. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for calling.